Edwin G. Lutz was an American artist, graphic designer, and illustrator. He was especially known for his cartoons and animations and for numerous instruction books. Born in 1868, he studied art in Paris and with Thomas Eakins in Philadelphia. He once said about himself that he was the only student in Eakins' class who went wrong. Everyone else in the class, he explained, went on to become respectable as architects, artists, and teachers. But I was a failure from the start, he said, because I favored comical drawings, which every teacher of drawing regards as a wicked joke on humanity. Over several decades, before and after World War I, Lutz wrote and illustrated 17 instructional books on drawing, design, lettering, and cartooning. In 1920, he produced his best-known book called Animated Cartoons: How They Are Made, Their Origin and Development. At the time, cartoon animation had just begun, and Lutz's book was an influence on its first practitioners. It is said that Walt Disney, at age 19, was greatly indebted to Lutz's book, which he had found in a Kansas City library. Earlier, in 1897, Lutz had published a series of cartoon panels in Life magazine. These panels were also animations in the sense that they consisted of a pictorial sequence in which changes occur from one panel to the next. They were also Lutz's attempt to document an on-stage presentation by a kind of artist known as a chalk talker, an artist who draws while an audience watches. Lutz referred to chalk talkers as lightning sketchers. In the panel that opens this series, the chalk talk artist, marker in hand, stands beside his drawing board. The audience begins to wonder, what kind of picture will he make? In the second panel, he makes his initial marks. Aha! He is drawing a seascape with sailboats and a sunrise. But in the next stage, all has changed. He is not drawing a seascape. He is making a winter scene instead, with a building in the foreground. In the fourth panel, amazingly, the building has changed into a bicycle. And in the last stage, which ends the artist's performance, the sun has changed into a head, and the bicycle now has a rider. Chalk talks depend on visual puns, and puns, whether visual or otherwise, use unexpected resemblances to prompt us to mistake one thing for another. This is abundantly evident in the comic drawings of American physicist Robert Williams Wood, in which shapes are cleverly drawn to make them look like other things. In one of Wood's drawings, for example, the flower we know as a pansy is made to resemble a chimpanzee. In another one, he cleverly confuses a cow with a cowrie shell. And in others, an antelope is placed beside a cantaloupe, and a parrot resembles a carrot. Wood produced his visual puns by placing two things side by side. But a pun can be just as easily made with only a single image, providing the thing that it mimics is produced in the mind of the viewer. Chalk talks consist of a sequence and are usually tied to a story. In this example from a talk about the history of Iowa, a cartoonist tells the story of Tama Jim, a legendary Secretary of Agriculture originally from Iowa, by making a cluster of various crops that are commonly grown by farmers. But moments later, by cleverly adding additional lines, Those drawings of crops have been transformed into what looks like the profile of a person best seen when the drawing is upside down. Turn it over, the Chalk Talk artist says to us, and when we do, we can easily make out the profile of Tema Jim. Chalk Talks are also related to an artistic tradition of making a series of images that appear to morph sequentially from one stage to another. This is, of course, not unlike shape-shifting in mythology. But in animation, as well as in biology, it is called metamorphosis, as observed in the sequence of stages by which a butterfly evolves. In the 19th century, when the writings of Darwin were published, nearly everyone saw the resemblance between evolutionary diagrams and the sequence of drawings that Chalk Talkers make. Chalk Talk drawings were sometimes called evolutionary drawings, and jokingly, they were also said to be Darwinian daydreams. But it was not evolution that Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace announced jointly in 1858. The public was well acquainted with selective breeding or artificial selection, and there had long been speculations about the so-called evolution of one form to another. The key innovation of Darwin and Wallace was the theory of natural selection. That idea that life forms evolve autonomously, without prescribed breeding plans, and without the guidance of an omnipotent mastermind. As early as the 16th century, an Italian playwright and scholar named Giambattista della Porta published his eccentric theories about natural magic. He hypothesized that there were pervasive connections among animals and plants. He also saw affinities between human beings and animals, as also occurs in language. When we say that some people are foxy, sheepish, harebrained, or act like weasels. In the 17th century, a prominent French artist named Charles Le Brun, the king's court painter at the time, studied the signs of emotion as seen on the human face. Through detailed portrait studies, he too made much of look-alike features in the physiognomic resemblance between humans and animals. In the first half of the 19th century, there was an extraordinary artist who created not just side-by-side comparisons, but who extended them further into complex sequences. He was a famous French illustrator who signed his name as Granville and who spoke of his sequential illustrations as metamorphoses. He also likened them to dreams, so, not surprisingly, it is often said that he was a forerunner of surrealism. His work is highly inventive and amazingly resourceful. Among other artists who made metamorphoses, perhaps the only other illustrator whose work compares with Granville's was a British Victorian artist named Charles Henry Bennett, whose work was in part a reaction to the controversy surrounding Darwin's theories. What did Charles Henry Bennett achieve? The answer is self-evident in his complex metamorphic schemes. He was prolific. He made so many drawings, we can't possibly look at them all. But one of his finest metamorphic drawings is a boy who evolves from a parrot, or a woman who becomes a cat, or a man who evolves from a donkey, which in turn becomes a wine cask and a bird, or a servant who becomes a dog, or a man holding a hat and umbrella, who evolves into a sheep, which in turn becomes the paddles in a game of badminton. In the second half of the 19th century, the concept of natural selection, which was soon widely referred to as the theory of evolution, became the hot topic of the day. It was most likely in everyone's mind, although it was frequently misunderstood. It was quickly dismissed as absurd or condemned as anti-religious. Given its susceptibility, few subjects had been so frequently targeted by social commentators. One artist created comparative drawings of an exotic lizard and, of all things, a common pocket knife. Another imagined that ballet dancers may have originated with a bird that resembles an ostrich. Another joker claimed that boys who play leapfrog too often are at risk of turning into frogs. In another example, a grasshopper is transformed into a person who is mounted on a cycle. Recalling the instructional books of Edwin Lutz, it may not be absurd to ask if his interest in metamorphic chalk talks prompted him to use step-by-step diagrams for how to draw instructions. From simple geometric forms to pictorial results. Some people have jokingly noted that if those how-to-draw instructional diagrams were reversed, one would begin with pictorial forms and end up with abstractions. That may have been in the mind of another satirist when he made a metamorphosis of the evolution of an artist. He makes simple abstract shapes as a child, then produces abstract art again at the close of his life. Finally, in Victorian times, there were interesting attempts by a British scientist named Augustus Pitt Rivers to use metamorphosis in analyzing weaponry and other man-made instruments. He made frequent use of diagrams in which he claimed to show the sequence of the development of various technological tools, as shown here, or as shown in this diagram of the hypothetical sequence of the refinement of the boomerang. In the 20th century, the most famous work of art that features metamorphosis is not a painting or drawing, but a celebrated novel titled The Metamorphosis by a Jewish Czech-born writer named Franz Kafka. Published in 1915, it begins with the following passage. As Gregor Samsa awoke one morning, from uneasy dreams he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect.